Chapter 12 of The Best Man. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Gail Mattern. The Best Man by Grace Livingston Hill. Chapter 12. Back at Milton, an hour before, when the shades of dusk were falling and a slender moon hung timidly on the edge of the horizon, a horse, drawing a spring wagon, ambled deliberately into town and came to a reluctant halt beside the railroad station, having made a wide detour through the larger part of the county on the way to that metropolis. The sun had been hot, the road much of it rough, and the jolts over stones and bumps had not added to the comfort of the thick-set man, already bruised and weary from his travels. Joe's conversation had not ceased. He had given his guest a wide range of topics, discoursing learnedly on the buckwheat crop and the blight that might be expected to assail the cherry trees. He pointed out certain portions of land infested with rattlesnakes, and told blood-curdling stories of experiences with stray bears and wild cats in a maple grove through which they passed, till the passenger looked furtively behind him and urged the driver to hurry a little faster. Joe, seeing his gullibility, only made his stories of country life the bigger, for the thick-set man, though bold as a lion in his own city haunts, was a coward in the unknown world of the country. When the traveller, looking at his watch, urged Joe to make haste and asked how many miles further Milton was, Joe managed it that the horse should stumble on a particularly stony bit of road. Then, getting down gravely from the wagon, he examined the horse's feet each in turn, shaking his head sadly over the left forefoot. "Jes' as I supposed," he meditated dreamily. "Stone bruise. Lame horse. Don't believe I ought to go on. Sorry, but it'll be the ruination of the horse. You ain't in a hurry, I hope." The passenger, in great excitement, promised to double the fare if the young man would get another horse and hurry him forward, and after great professions of doubt Joe gave in and said he would try the horse, but it wouldn't do to work him hard. They would have to let him take his time. He couldn't on any account leave the horse behind anywhere and get a fresh one, because it belonged to his best friend, and he promised to bring it back safe and sound. They would just take their time and go slow and see if the horse could stand it. He wouldn't think of trying it if it weren't for the extra money which he needed. So the impatient traveller was dragged fuming along, weary hour after weary hour, through the monotonous glory of a spring afternoon of which he saw nothing but the dust of the road, as he tried to count the endless miles. Every mile or two Joe would descend from the wagon seat and fuss around the horse's leg, the horse nothing loth at such unprecedented attention, dozing cozily by the roadside during the process. And so was the traveller brought to his destination 10 minutes after the last train that stopped at Milton that night had passed the station. The telegraph office was not closed, however, and without waiting to haggle, the passenger paid his $30 for the longest journey he ever took, and disappeared into the station, while Joe, whipping up his petted animal and whistling cheerily, "Where did you get that girl?" went rattling down the short cut from Milton home at a surprising pace for a lame horse. He was eating his supper at home in a little more than an hour, and the horse seemed to have miraculously recovered from his stone bruise. Joe was wondering how his girl would look in a hat with purple plumes, and thinking of his $30 with a chuckle. It was surprising how much that thick-set man, weary and desperate though he was, could accomplish when once he reached the telegraph station and sent his messages flying on their way. In less than 3 minutes after his arrival he had extracted from the station agent the fact that 2 people, man and woman, answering the description he gave, had bought tickets for Pittsburgh and taken the afternoon train for that city. The agent had noticed them on account of their looking as if they came from the city. He especially noticed the purple plumes, the like of which he had never seen before. He had taken every minute he could get off from his selling tickets and sending telegrams to watch the lady through his little cobwebby window. They didn't wear hats like that in Milton. In 10 minutes one message was on its way to a crony in Pittsburgh with whom the thick-set man kept in constant touch for just such occasions as the present, stirring him to strenuous action. Another message had winged its mysterious way to Mr. Holman, giving him the main facts in the case, while a third message caught another crony 30 miles north of Pittsburgh and ordered him to board the evening express at his own station, hunt up the parties described, and shadow them to their destination, if possible getting in touch with the Pittsburgh crony when he reached the city. The pursuer then ate a ham sandwich with liberal washings of liquid fire, while he awaited replies to some of his messages, and as soon as he was satisfied that he had set justice in motion, he hired an automobile and hied him across country to catch a midnight express to Pittsburgh. He had given orders that his man and accompanying lady should be held in Pittsburgh until his arrival, and he had no doubt but that the orders would be carried out. So sure was he that he was on the right track, and that his cronies would be able and willing to follow his orders. There was some kind of an excursion on at Pittsburgh, and the place was crowded. The trainmen kept calling off specials, and crowds hurried out of the waiting room, only to be replaced by other crowds, all eager, pushing, talking, laughing. They were mostly men, but a good many women and some children seemed to be of the number, and the noise and excitement worried her after her own exciting afternoon. Celia longed to lay her down and sleep, but the seat was narrow and hard, and people were pressing on every side. That disagreeable man in the slouch hat would stand too near. He was most repulsive looking, though he did not seem to be aware of her presence. Gordon had a long wait before he finally secured the coveted stateroom and started back to her, when suddenly a face that he knew loomed up in the crowd and startled him. It was the face of a private detective who was well known about Washington, but whose headquarters were in New York. Until that instant it had not occurred to him to fear watchers so far south and west as Pittsburgh. It was not possible that the other bridegroom would think to track him here, and as for the Holman contingent, they would not be likely to make a public disturbance about his disappearance, lest they be found to have some connection with the first theft of government property. They could have watchers only through private means, and they must have been wily indeed if they had anticipated his move through Pittsburgh to Washington. Still, it was the natural move for him to make in order to get home as quickly as possible and yet escape them, and this man in the crowd was the very one whom they would have been likely to pick out for their work. He was as slippery in his dealings as they must be, and no doubt was in league with them. He knew the man and his ways thoroughly, and had no mind to fall into his hands. Whether he had been seen by the detective yet or not he could not tell, but he suspected he had, by the way the man stood around and avoided recognizing him. There was not an instant to be lost. The fine stateroom must go untenanted. He must make a dash for Liberty. Liberty! Ah! East Liberty! What queer things these brains of ours are! He knew Pittsburgh just a little. He remembered having caught a train at East Liberty Station once, when he had not time to come down to the station to take it. Perhaps he might get the same train at East Liberty. It was nearly 2 hours before it left. Swooping down upon the baggage, he murmured in the girl's ear, "Can you hurry a little? We must catch a car right away." She followed him closely through the crowd, he stooping as if to look down at his suitcase, so that his height might not attract the attention of the man whose recognition he feared, and in a moment more they were out in the lighted blackness of the streets. One glance backward showed his supposed enemy stretching his neck above the crowd, as if searching for someone, as he walked hurriedly toward the very doorway they had just passed. Behind them shadowed the man in the slouch hat, and with a curious motion of his hand signaled another like himself, the Pittsburgh crony, who skulked in the darkness outside. Instantly this man gave another signal, and out of the gloom of the street a carriage drew up at the curb before the door, the cabman looking eagerly for patronage. Gordon put both suitcases in one hand, and taking Celia's arm as gently as he could in his haste, hurried her toward